Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about manual camera settings, which is really neat because you're finally getting to the point of photography where you can control all aspects of taking the image, which also means that you can capture images that you didn't realize you could, or that maybe you wondered, like, how do people even do that? It's usually with the manual settings. So if you look at the little visual I have here, this is called the exposure triangle. So there's three components that are controlling your camera, and that is your light sensitivity, so your ISO, your shutter speed, which is how fast you're taking the image, and then your aperture, which is how much light that you're letting in. So let's take a look at each of these. Okay, so I'm going to talk about shutter first, and that is the question or the link that I've put in for Classroom this week. So that involves a slow shutter speed. So the shutter is how quickly you're taking a photograph. So if you are taking a photograph really quickly, you're freezing motion. So if you look at the diagram, you see the bird. This picture is being taken at 1/1000th of a second, really, really fast. So you're able to capture something really fast that's happening. For example, if you were photographing the Olympics, you'd probably want a really fast shutter speed to get the athletes frozen in motion. But as you go into a slower shutter speed, 1/60th of a second, etc., the image starts to blur. So if you're doing something where you're wanting to capture emotion in progress and you want it to kind of be a blurred effect where you get the whole thing, then you want a slower shutter speed. So the example I think of is, do you guys ever see the photographs of like glow sticks where they're like making a heart or they're writing something? So that would be a slow shutter speed, because you have to have enough time to make the motion of whatever you're wanting the glow stick to do. And the camera is capturing essentially that moment, that time. It's almost like it's recording a moment and then freezing it into one image, which can be really, really cool. Here's another example of 1/750th of a second, and then you can see that's frozen, but then as the image gets further and further and slower, you almost get like a ghost image in this last one because it's going by and the image is being taken over a period of time, so you're just kind of seeing a trail of the car. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is ISO. And this is basically your camera light sensitivity. So the lower the ISO number, the lower the sensitivity to the light. So if you're wanting to get more sensitivity to the light, you need to increase your ISO. But the only catch on this is the more you increase your ISO, sometimes you also get like this grainy effect. So the image quality is not as good. So you do have to be careful with it. This one's probably better seen in images, so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so you have this sunset scene and you're trying to shoot it. And in this one, it's kind of underexposed. So the ISO probably needs to be a little bit higher. So this is definitely a better result. And then they've pushed it a little further here. That's probably about as far as you'd want to go. You'd probably want to be somewhere in here, because once we get to this 800, if you zoomed in, the image quality wouldn't be quite as good. It would be kind of pixelated and grainy, which we don't want. So that's kind of what you're watching for with the ISO. It's basically like your sensitivity, your exposure. Okay, so your aperture is the third component, and this is controlling how much light you're letting in. It's actually like the opening that's letting light in. It's how big that opening is. So if you look over here, the aperture numbers are referred to as f-stops. So if we look at this first one, we've got a really tiny little f-stop. The weird thing is f-stops, the higher the number, the smaller the hole, which I don't think really makes sense, but that's how it goes. So we have f-stop 32. So really tiny little pinhole letting in light here. And the result is a wide depth of field. But as the f-stop number gets lower and the opening gets larger, letting in more light, you get a more and more shallow depth of field. So you just have to kind of know, what you're wanting to do. Here's a visual example of that. So this is an f-stop 2.2, so a fairly large hole letting in quite a bit of light, and you can see how shallow this depth of field is. And then as the depth of field gets wider, the f-stop number is getting higher, right? So little bit of light, little more light, and then, you can see it, or I'm sorry, other way around, more light, a little bit less light, and so forth, all the way to where this one is the least amount of light. So, and again, that's really, really important when controlling, what you want to be in focus and your depth of field. So all three of these manual functions work together. So sometimes, you're messing with the f-stop and then that kind of impacts your shutter speed and vice versa. So when first beginning, it's good to try to only control one thing at a time. So learn how to control shutter, learn how to control f-stop, and then learn how to control ISO instead of trying to do all three simultaneously. So that's how we're going to be doing it. We're going to be starting one at a time. So next week, I'm going to send out a simulator for you guys to try it with. And then I'm going to have you come in and actually experiment and physically try it on our cameras, which will be really cool. And you'll get some neat photos that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So anyway, we'll be continuing manual settings next week.